Jake Thornton stood on the porch of his cabin, a Winchester rifle held ready in his hands. 3 cavalry soldiers faced him from 20 feet away, their pistols holstered but their eyes cold with threat. The sun hung low behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of red and orange that looked like the land itself was bleeding. "Hand her over, Thornton." The lieutenant's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Or things will get very difficult for you." From inside the cabin, a woman's voice called out, calm, steady, despite everything. "Don't. They will come back with more men." Jake did not turn around. His finger rested near the trigger, steady as stone. "Then I'll be ready." This was the moment everything changed. The moment a 49-year-old man who had lived alone for 15 years decided to risk everything for a woman he had met just 7 days before. To understand how we got here, we need to go back. 7 days earlier, the Arizona sky was burning. Not the soft orange of ordinary sunsets, but a deep crimson that spread across the horizon like dried blood. Like the land itself carried a wound that would never heal. Jake Thornton reined in his horse on the hilltop and looked down at the valley below. His cabin sat there alone, a small dark shape against the golden grass smoke not rising from the chimney, no movement in the corral. Just emptiness waiting for him. 3 months. 3 months on the cattle trail from Texas to Abilene. 3 months of dust and sweat and sleepless nights. 3 months of driving stubborn longhorns across rivers and through storms while young cowboys half his age complained about sore backs and bad coffee. Now all Jake wanted was a clean bed and silence. He was 49 years old, though most people guessed older. The sun and wind had carved deep lines into his face, and his dark hair had turned gray at the temples years ago. Not from age, people said. From what he had seen. From what he remembered, a scar ran from his right temple down to his jaw, thin and white against weathered skin. A souvenir from Gettysburg, where he had nearly died at 17. 32 years ago, but sometimes it felt like yesterday. Sometimes he still heard the cannons in his dreams. Jake Thornton was the kind of man the frontier created and consumed in equal measure. Hard as oak, silent as stone, dangerous when cornered. He had killed men in the war, killed more after it ended, and somewhere along the way he had stopped counting. Not because he was proud of it, because counting meant remembering, and remembering meant feeling, and feeling was something Jake had taught himself to avoid. He clicked his tongue and nudged his horse Duke forward, descending the hill toward home. Home. The word felt strange, even in his thoughts. Could you call a place home, if no one waited for you there? If the only voice you heard was your own echo off the walls? Jake had bought this land 15 years ago, with money saved from cattle drives and odd jobs. A small cabin, a corral, enough acreage for a few head of cattle, and a vegetable garden. Not much by most standards, but it was his. The first thing he had truly owned since leaving Virginia after the war. He had built his life here in solitude. Not because he hated people, but because he had forgotten how to trust them. His nearest neighbors were the Morrison Ranch 2 hours east and the Henderson Way Station 3 hours north. He saw them maybe twice a year, exchanged pleasantries, bought supplies, and returned to his silence. It suited him, or so he told himself. As Jake approached the cabin, something stirred in his chest. A feeling he had learned to trust during the war, when ignoring it meant death. Instinct, warning, the sense that something was wrong even before his eyes confirmed it. The corral gate hung open, swinging gently in the evening breeze. Jake always locked that gate. Always. It was habit ritual, the kind of small discipline that kept a man alive in country like this. Duke snorted and tossed his head ears flat against his skull. "Easy," Jake murmured. But his hand was already moving to the revolver at his hip. He dismounted slowly, tied Duke to the fence post, and began walking toward the cabin. His boots made no sound on the packed earth. Another habit from the war, from the years as a scout, when silence meant survival. The cabin door was unlatched. Jake stood beside it listening. No sound from inside. But there was something else. A smell. Smoke and crushed sage, faint but unmistakable. Someone had built a fire in his hearth. Recently. He drew his Colt, thumbed back the hammer, and pushed the door open with the barrel. The fading light of sunset sliced through the gaps in the wooden walls, creating bars of gold across the dim interior. Dust motes floated in the air like tiny spirits. The fire pit held fresh ash, still warm. A bowl of water sat on the table half empty, and on his bed beneath his blanket lay a woman. For one terrible moment, Jake thought she was dead. Her skin was pale, her dark hair spread across the pillow like spilled ink, and her chest did not seem to move. Then her eyes snapped open. What happened next took less than 2 seconds, but Jake would remember it for the rest of his life. She moved like water, like shadow, like something not entirely human. One moment she was lying still. The next she was sitting up against the wall, a knife in her hand, the black obsidian blade catching the last light of day. Apache. Jake knew it instantly. The high cheekbones, the sharp features, the beaded cord around her wrist. Everything about her screamed danger, but not the kind that came from malice. The danger of a wounded animal, the danger of someone who had nothing left to lose. He froze. Slowly, deliberately, he raised both hands and let his revolver fall to the wooden floor. The sound echoed through the cabin like a thunderclap. "I'm not going to hurt you." His voice came out calm, steady, despite the fear crawling up his spine. "This is my home. Do you understand English?" She did not answer. Her dark eyes tracked his every movement, calculating, assessing. The knife in her hand trembled slightly, but her grip never wavered. She was afraid of him, terrified even, but she was ready to kill him if she had to. Jake respected that. He took a step closer, hands still raised, palms out. He pointed to the knife, then to himself, then shook his head slowly. No threat, no danger, just a man in his own home trying to understand what he had walked into. Then she shifted position, and he saw the blood. It had soaked through his bedsheets, spreading in a dark stain along her left side. Old blood and new blood, dried and fresh, mixed together in a wound that should have killed her. Jake had seen enough injuries in the war to recognize the severity. This was deep. This was bad. A knife wound or a bullet graze, he could not tell which, but infection had already begun to set in. The skin around the gash was red and swollen, angry with fever. She should not be alive. With blood loss like this, she should not even be conscious. But she was, and she was still holding that knife. Something shifted in Jake's chest. Not pity exactly, something harder to name. Recognition, maybe. The understanding that passed between people who had both stared death in the face and refused to blink. He took another step forward. She tensed, the knife rising higher. Jake pointed to the wound, then to himself, then mimed the action of cleaning and bandaging. He did it slowly, carefully, making sure she understood. She watched him for a long moment. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying sounds across the prairie that might have been hoofbeats, or might have been nothing at all. Jake understood the danger immediately. If soldiers found her here, they would not ask questions. If his neighbors learned he was sheltering an Apache woman, they would turn on him just as fast. The territory had been at war with the Apache for years. The cavalry was running sweeps through the region, hunting down anyone who had escaped the reservations. Helping her was not just risky, it was treason. But Jake Thornton had stopped caring about such things a long time ago. The woman lowered the knife, not in trust, in exhaustion. Her body had finally reached its limit, and even her iron will could not overcome it. Jake took that as permission. He moved to the fireplace and added wood to the dying embers. He found clean rags in his trunk, tore them into strips. He retrieved the bottle of whiskey he kept hidden beneath the floorboards, the good stuff he saved for emergencies and lonely nights. This qualified as both. When he knelt beside the bed, she tensed again, every muscle coiled tight. But she did not raise the knife. She watched as he examined the wound, as he cleaned it with warm water and whiskey, as he bandaged it with hands that were surprisingly gentle for a man of his size and history. The pain must have been excruciating. He could see it in the way her jaw clenched, in the single bead of sweat that rolled down her temple. But she made no sound. Not a whimper, not a gasp. Jake had known soldiers who cried out from lesser wounds. This woman was something else entirely. When he finished, she spoke for the first time. A single word in her own language, low and melodic, like water over stones. He did not understand it, but the tone needed no translation. "Thank you." Grudging, reluctant, but real. She pointed to herself and spoke again. "Kira." Then she looked at him, waiting. "Jake," he said, touching his chest. "Jake Thornton." She repeated his name carefully, testing its weight on her tongue. "Jake." The sound was different when she said it. Softer, like a whisper. That night, Jake did not sleep. He sat in the chair by the fireplace, rifle across his knees, watching the door and listening to the wind. Every few hours, he checked her bandages, added wood to the fire, kept water warm on the stove. He knew what he was doing. He knew the risk. And when he barred the cabin door before midnight, he understood that he was not doing it to keep her in. He was doing it to keep the world out. Dawn came slow and pale, the light creeping through the cracks in the walls like hesitant fingers. Jake woke stiff and sore from sleeping upright, his neck aching and his eyes burning from exhaustion. Kira was awake, watching him. He wondered how long she had been studying him while he slept. The thought should have been unsettling. Instead, he found it oddly comforting. If she had wanted to kill him, she had plenty of opportunity. Her hand rested near the knife on the pillow, but she did not reach for it when he stood up. Progress. "You need to eat," Jake said, knowing she probably did not understand the words. But talking helped him think, and the silence in the cabin had grown too heavy. "I'll make porridge, easy on the stomach for someone who's lost as much blood as you have." He moved to the stove, found cornmeal in the cupboard, mixed it with water and a pinch of salt. While the porridge cooked, he sliced dried beef into small pieces to add protein. Kira watched every movement, not with suspicion anymore, but with something closer to curiosity, like she was trying to understand him, to read his intentions from the way he stirred the pot and checked the fire. When he brought her the bowl, she hesitated. She sniffed it first, an instinctive caution, then began to eat. Small bites, careful and controlled. They ate in silence, Jake in his chair and Kira on the bed. The morning light grew stronger, illuminating the cabin in shades of gold and amber. Outside, birds sang their dawn chorus, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled its last call before retreating from the sun. Jake studied her more closely now that fear was not clouding his vision. She was younger than he first thought. Maybe 28, possibly younger, though it was hard to tell with Apache women. Her face held sharp angles like carved sandstone, high cheekbones and a straight nose and a chin that spoke of stubbornness. Her lips were thin but well-shaped, and when she was not forcing herself to look cold, there was a sadness in the way the corners of her mouth turned down. But her eyes were what held him. Black as coal, deep as wells, alive with a fire that should have been extinguished by everything she had clearly endured. Those were not the eyes of someone who had given up. Those were the eyes of a survivor. He noticed other things, too. Old scars on her wrists, faded but visible. The marks of rope burns. Bruises on her arms yellowed with age. Signs of restraint, of violence, of treatment no human being deserved. She had not just been wounded. She had been tortured. Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. Anger, maybe, or the first stirrings of a resolve he had not felt in years. "What happened to you?" he asked quietly, not expecting an answer. Kira looked at him over the rim of her bowl. Something flickered in her eyes. Understanding, perhaps. She knew what he was asking, even if she could not respond. She pointed to herself, then made a motion like running. She pointed to her wound, then gestured toward the east, toward the rising sun. Running. From someone. From something. Jake nodded slowly. He would get the full story eventually. For now, this was enough. The days that followed settled into a strange rhythm. Jake did his chores, the daily work of maintaining a homestead in hostile country. He fed the horses, repaired the fence line, checked his rabbit traps. Normal tasks made surreal by the presence of a woman in his cabin who should not exist, who should not be alive, who changed everything simply by being there. Kira healed faster than he expected. By the third day, she could move around the cabin without help. By the fifth, she was walking outside, testing her limits, rebuilding her strength with the same fierce determination she brought to everything. They developed a language between them, part gesture, part drawing in the dirt, part single words repeated until understanding clicked into place. Jake learned the Apache words for water, fire, danger, safe. Kira learned English with startling speed, absorbing vocabulary like dry earth drinking rain. On the fourth day, Jake rode out to check the fence line and left her alone with the door unlocked. Part of him expected to return to an empty cabin. She could have taken a horse supplies weapons. She could have vanished into the wilderness, and he never would have found her. But when he returned, she was sitting by the fire, carving intricate patterns into a strip of wood with the tip of her knife. She looked up when he entered, not startled, just aware. The knife stayed in her hand, but it no longer trembled. That night Jake sat by the fire reading an old copy of Moby Dick, the pages worn soft from years of handling. Kira watched him from across the room, curiosity plain on her face. "Book?" she said in English, pointing. Jake nodded. "Yes." "Book. Story." "Story," she repeated. Then she pointed to herself. "Kira, story." Jake set the book down and waited. What followed was unlike anything he had experienced. Kira told her story using a mixture of Apache broken English and gestures so expressive they transcended language entirely. She spoke of her people, her family, her life, before everything fell apart. She was the daughter of a chief named Running Eagle, a leader who had fought against the cavalry until his last breath. Her people had been forced onto the San Carlos reservation after his death, packed into a wasteland of dust and despair that she called the place where souls go to die. She had a husband once, a young warrior named Swift Arrow, and a son, a 3-year-old boy named Little Fox. When she spoke his name, her voice cracked for the first time, the only sign of weakness she had shown since Jake found her. Jake listened without interruption. He watched her face as she described what came next, and he saw the moment when memory became too much, when the words caught in her throat like stones. He did not push. He simply waited, and eventually she continued. 6 months ago, soldiers came to their shelter in the night. They were drunk. 3 of them cavalry uniforms, disheveled and stinking of whiskey. They wanted her. They did not care about her husband or her child. They only cared about what they could take. Swift Arrow tried to stop them. They shot him in front of her. Little Fox tried to run. A bullet caught him in the back before he made it 10 steps. Kira's voice went flat when she told this part, emotionless, dead. It was the only way she could speak of it without breaking completely. What they did to her afterward, she did not say. She did not need to. The old scars on her wrists, the faded bruises, the way she flinched when anyone moved too quickly toward her. Jake understood. She escaped that night. She did not explain how, and Jake did not ask. Some things were better left in darkness. For 6 months, she lived in the wilderness, moving constantly, trusting no one. She avoided other Apache groups because she did not want to bring danger to them. She avoided white settlements because every pale face reminded her of that night. The wound in her side came from a fight 3 days before Jake found her. Bounty hunters tracking her for the price on her head. She killed 2 of them before the third managed to throw a knife. She killed him too, but not before the blade found its mark. She came to Jake's cabin because it looked abandoned. She thought she could rest for a day, maybe 2, and then continue running. "And now?" Jake asked when she finished. Kira looked at him with those dark eyes, waiting for judgment, expecting rejection. "Now you stay," Jake said, "until you're healed, until it's safe." "Not safe," she replied. "Never safe. They come." "Who?" Kira's jaw tightened. When she spoke the name, her voice carried a hatred so pure it seemed to burn the air. "Lieutenant Marcus Webb." Jake felt the name lodge in his memory like a splinter. "He commanded the soldiers that night." Kira continued, her English improving with each sentence as if rage itself was teaching her the words. "He gave the orders. He watched. He laughed." She paused, gathering herself. "I am the only one who lived, the only witness. He will not stop until I am dead." Jake sat in silence for a long moment, processing what she had told him. A cavalry officer who had ordered the murder of a child, who had watched his men violate a woman, who was now hunting her across the territory to protect his secret. It should have been unbelievable. It should have been too terrible to accept. But Jake had served in the war. He had seen what men were capable of when they wore uniforms and followed orders. He had watched brothers in arms commit acts that would haunt them forever, all in the name of duty or country, or simple cruelty dressed up as necessity. He believed her, every word. "This Lieutenant Webb," Jake said slowly. "Do you remember his face?" Kira nodded, her eyes flashing with that dangerous fire. "I will never forget." "Good." Jake's voice dropped lower, harder. "Because if he comes here, I want to know who I'm killing." Something shifted in Kira's expression. Not trust, not yet, but something close. Hope. 7 days after Jake found her, the soldiers came. He was outside splitting wood when he heard the hoofbeats, distant at first, then growing louder, more distinct, multiple horses moving fast and purposeful. Jake set down the axe slowly, carefully, keeping his movements casual, even as every nerve in his body screamed warning. Kira appeared at the cabin door, her face already tight with recognition. She did not need words to understand. 6 months of running had taught her the sound of danger. "Go," Jake said quietly. "Out the back. Hide in the brush. Don't come out no matter what happens." She hesitated, and for a moment he saw the warrior in her fighting with the survivor. She did not want to run. She wanted to stand beside him and face whatever was coming. "Please," Jake said. Something in his voice made her pause. "Trust me." Kira held his gaze for one long second. Then she slipped around the corner of the cabin and vanished into the brush like smoke on the wind. Jake picked up the axe again and resumed splitting wood. By the time the riders crested the hill, he looked like nothing more than a rancher going about his morning chores. 3 cavalry soldiers descended toward his cabin. Their blue coats caught the early light, brass buttons gleaming. The man in front rode with the easy confidence of command, his back straight and his eyes cold. Jake recognized the type immediately. An officer who had found power and learned to enjoy it. Lieutenant Marcus Webb. He was younger than Jake expected. Mid-40s perhaps, with a face that might have been handsome before bitterness carved permanent lines around his mouth. His eyes were pale blue and empty, like frozen water that nothing could warm. "Good morning?" Webb reined his horse to a stop about 15 feet from Jake. "You must be Thornton. Jacob Thornton." "That's right." Jake kept his voice neutral, his posture relaxed. "Something I can help you with, Lieutenant?" "Possibly." Webb's eyes swept across the cabin, the corral, the surrounding brush, taking inventory, looking for anything out of place. "We're searching for an Apache woman, wounded, dangerous. She killed 3 bounty hunters a few days back." "Haven't seen anyone." Jake shrugged. "Just got back from a 3-month cattle drive. Place has been empty." "Is that so?" Webb's tone made it clear he was not asking a question. "You won't mind if we look around then?" It was not a request. Jake knew that. Refusing would only raise suspicion. "Help yourself." He gestured toward the cabin with the axe. "Coffee's on if you want some." One of the soldiers dismounted and began searching, his eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. Jake watched him enter the cabin and felt his heart hammer against his ribs. The blood-stained sheets, the extra dishes, small signs that a careful man would notice. Jake forced himself to breathe evenly, to keep splitting wood like nothing in the world was wrong. Minutes passed. They felt like hours. Then the soldier emerged, shaking his head. "Nothing, sir. Place looks clean." Jake allowed himself a single moment of relief. Webb nodded slowly, but his pale eyes remained fixed on Jake, calculating, suspicious. "We'll be back," the lieutenant said, turning his horse. "If you see anything, report to Fort Apache. There's a reward for information." "I'll keep that in mind." Webb rode away with his men, dust rising behind them like a curtain. Jake watched until they disappeared over the hill, until the sound of hoofbeats faded into silence. Then Kira emerged from the brush, her face pale and her hands steady. "He knows," she said. Jake nodded. "He suspects." "That's not the same thing." "He will come back." "Yes." Jake set down the axe and looked at her. "He will." They stood together in the morning light, 2 people from different worlds who had somehow found themselves on the same side of a line that most people never had to cross. "Then we prepare," Kira said. Jake nodded once more. "Then we prepare." But even as he spoke the words, he knew that preparation would not be enough. Webb was not the kind of man who gave up. He had killed to protect his secrets, and he would kill again. The only question was whether Jake would be ready when he came. And somewhere deep in his chest, in a place he had thought long dead, something stirred to life. Not fear, not anger, purpose. For the first time in 15 years, Jacob Thornton had a reason to fight for something other than survival. He was not sure if that made him brave or foolish. Maybe it was both. That night, as they sat by the fire preparing for what was to come, Kira asked him the question he had been avoiding for 15 years. "You have lost someone," she said. "Not a question, an observation. I see it in your eyes, the same look I see in my own." Jake stared into the flames for a long time before answering. "My wife," he finally said. "Emily. And a daughter. Sarah. She was 4 years old." The words came out rusty, unused. He had not spoken their names aloud since leaving Virginia. "What happened?" "Fever. Winter of '64. I was at the front fighting a war that didn't matter for people who didn't care. By the time the letter reached me, they were already buried." He paused, feeling the old wound tear open fresh. "I never got to say goodbye. Never got to hold my daughter one last time. Never got to tell my wife that she was the only good thing in my whole miserable life." Kira said nothing. She understood that some pain could not be comforted with words. "After the war, I came west," Jake continued. "Spent years drifting. Cattle drives, mining camps, anywhere that kept me moving. Couldn't stand to stay in one place long enough for the memories to catch up." He paused. "Finally stopped running about 15 years ago. Built this cabin because I thought if I stayed still long enough, the memories would stop chasing me." "Did they?" Jake shook his head. "They never do. You just learn to live with the ghosts." Kira reached out and placed her hand over his. A small gesture, but in that moment it meant everything. "My people believe the dead do not leave us," she said softly. "They become stars. They watch over us from above." Jake looked up through the smoke hole in the roof at the endless scatter of light across the darkness. "You think Emily and Sarah are up there somewhere?" "I think little Fox is." Kira's voice cracked slightly. "I talk to him sometimes, when no one is listening." They sat together in silence after that, two broken people sharing their grief like a fire that kept them warm against the cold. And somewhere in that silence something shifted between them. Not love, not yet. Something more fragile, more precious, understanding. The understanding that they were no longer alone. That night, for the first time in years, Jake fell asleep without dreaming of cannon fire and blood-soaked fields. He dreamed instead of stars. 3 days passed in something like peace. Jake knew it would not last. Peace never did not in this territory, not with men like Webb hunting for blood. But he allowed himself to believe just for a little while that the world might leave them alone. He was wrong. The soldiers came back on the morning of the 10th day. Not 3 this time, 5, and they did not come asking questions. Jake heard them before he saw them. The thunder of hooves on hard-packed earth moving fast, moving with purpose. He was repairing the corral fence when the sound reached him and his hands went still on the hammer. Kira appeared at the cabin door. Her face had gone pale, but her eyes were steady. 6 months of running had taught her to recognize the sound of death approaching. "How many?" she asked. Jake squinted toward the dust cloud rising on the eastern horizon. 5, maybe 6. Too many to fight. Too many to run from. He set down the hammer and retrieved his Winchester from where it leaned against the fence post. "Get inside. Stay away from the windows. Whatever happens, don't come out unless I call for you." Kira did not argue. She understood tactics, understood that her presence would only complicate things. But as she turned to go, she paused. "Jake." He looked at her. "Don't die for me." Something passed between them in that moment. Something neither of them had words for. "I don't plan on dying at all," Jake said. "Now go." She went. Jake walked to the front of the cabin and waited, rifle held loosely at his side. Not threatening, but not hidden either. A man had a right to be armed on his own property. The riders crested the hill and descended toward him in formation. Webb rode at the center, flanked by 4 soldiers with carbines across their saddles. Their faces were hard, their postures aggressive. This was not a friendly visit. Webb reined up 20 feet from Jake, the same distance as before. But something had changed in his pale eyes. The suspicion had crystallized into certainty. "Mr. Thornton." Webb's voice was flat, dangerous. "We need to search your property again." "You already searched it." "That was a courtesy call." Webb smiled, and there was no warmth in it. "This is official business. We have reports that the Apache woman we're hunting was seen in this area, very recently." Jake kept his face blank. "Reports from who?" "That's not your concern." Webb gestured to his men. "Search the cabin, the corral, the brush around the perimeter. Leave nothing unexamined." 2 soldiers dismounted and began moving toward the cabin. Jake stepped into their path, his grip tightening on the rifle. "You have a warrant." "I don't need a warrant." Webb's smile widened. "We're operating under military authority. The Apache wars give us jurisdiction over any property suspected of harboring enemy combatants." "She's not a combatant, she's a woman." The words were out before Jake could stop them. He saw Webb's eyes narrow, saw the trap closing around him. "She?" Webb leaned forward in his saddle. "I don't believe I mentioned the fugitive was female, Mr. Thornton." Silence. The wind swept across the prairie carrying dust and the faint smell of sage. Jake had made a mistake, a small one, but enough. "Everyone knows you're hunting an Apache woman," he said, keeping his voice steady. "Word travels fast out here." "Does it?" Webb was not asking. "Search the cabin." The soldiers moved past Jake. He could have stopped them, could have raised his rifle and started something that would end with bodies in the dirt. But there were 5 of them, and one of him and Kira was inside, and dying heroically would not save her. He let them go. The next few minutes stretched into eternity. Jake stood in the yard, Webb watching him from horseback, while the sounds of the search filtered out through the cabin walls. Furniture scraping, floorboards creaking, the clatter of his few possessions being examined and discarded. Then one of the soldiers appeared in the doorway holding something up, a beaded bracelet, Apache design. Kira must have dropped it or hidden it somewhere she thought was safe. "Found this under the bed, sir." Webb's smile turned predatory. "Well now, that's interesting." He looked at Jake with something like triumph. "Care to explain how Apache jewelry ended up in your cabin, Mr. Thornton?" Jake's mind raced. He needed a lie, needed something plausible, needed to buy time. "Trade goods," he said. "Picked it up in Tucson last year, was planning to sell it." "Is that so?" Webb dismounted slowly, deliberately. "Then you won't mind if we take a closer look around. Perhaps we'll find more trade goods." He walked toward the cabin, and Jake knew with cold certainty that they would find Kira. The cabin was not large. There were only so many places to hide, and when they found her, they would kill her. They would probably kill him too, unless he stopped them. "Webb." The lieutenant turned. Jake raised his rifle, not pointing it at anyone but holding it ready, a threat and a warning in one motion. "That's far enough." The soldiers went for their weapons. Jake heard the click of hammers being pulled back, saw the carbines swing toward his chest. "You sure you want to do this?" Webb's voice was soft, almost amused. 5 against 1. Even a veteran like yourself can't like those odds." "Maybe not." Jake's finger found the trigger. "But I guarantee I'll take at least 2 of you with me. Want to find out if you're one of them." For a long moment, nobody moved. The tension stretched tight as piano wire ready to snap at the slightest pressure. Then a sound split the air, a bowstring releasing, a whistle of fletching cutting through wind. An arrow buried itself in the ground 6 inches from Webb's foot. Chaos erupted. Horses reared and screamed. Soldiers shouted, swinging their carbines toward the brush behind the cabin. Webb stumbled backward, his composure finally cracking. "Contact! Contact in the trees!" Another arrow flew, this one striking the dirt near one of the mounted soldiers. The man's horse panicked, throwing him hard to the ground. Jake moved without thinking. He swung his rifle up and fired into the air, the shot echoing across the valley like thunder. "Everyone stop!" His voice cut through the chaos, the voice of a man who had commanded troops in battle, who had learned to make himself heard above cannon fire and screaming. For a single frozen instant, everyone stopped. Jake stood between the soldiers and the brush where Kira was hidden. His rifle was ready but not aimed. His eyes locked with Webb's. "This is my land," Jake said, his voice carrying across the sudden silence. "Whatever you think you're looking for, you won't find it here. Take your men and leave. You're harboring an Apache fugitive." Webb's face had gone red with fury. "That's treason. That's a hanging offense. I'm protecting a wounded woman who came to my door asking for help. Last time I checked, that wasn't a crime. She killed 3 men, bounty hunters who were trying to kill her first." Jake took a step forward, his presence commanding despite being outnumbered. "I know what happened at San Carlos, Webb. I know what you and your men did that night. The murder, the rape, the child you shot in the back while he was trying to run." The color drained from Webb's face. For just a second, Jake saw fear in those pale eyes, real fear, the kind that comes from having your secrets dragged into the light. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Jake's voice dropped lower, harder. "She told me everything. She's the only witness to what you did, and you've been hunting her for 6 months to make sure she never talks. But here's the thing, Lieutenant. She already talked, to me, and I believe every word." Silence. The wind moaned across the prairie, stirring dust devils in the yard. Webb's hand moved toward his pistol. Jake tracked the motion, ready to fire. "If you pull that weapon," Jake said quietly, "you'd better not miss." They stood like that for what felt like hours. 2 men on the edge of violence, each waiting for the other to blink. Finally, Webb stepped back. "This isn't over, Thornton." His voice was steady, again controlled, but the fear still lurked beneath the surface. "I'll be back with more men, with warrants, with authority to do whatever is necessary. Then I'll be ready." Webb mounted his horse, his movements stiff with barely contained rage. He looked down at Jake with eyes that promised death. "You just made the worst mistake of your life." Jake did not flinch. "That's what they told me at Gettysburg. I'm still here." The soldiers gathered their wounded companion and rode away, dust rising behind them like a shroud. Jake watched until they disappeared over the hill, until the sound of hoofbeats faded to nothing. Then Kira emerged from the brush, her bow still in hand, her face grave. "You should have let them take me," she said. "No. They will come back, with more men, with guns. They will burn this place to the ground." "I know." She looked at him, her dark eyes searching his face for something she seemed afraid to find. Why risk everything for a woman you barely know?" Jake turned to face her. The afternoon sun caught the lines on his face, the gray in his hair, the scar that ran from temple to jaw. He looked like what he was, a man who had seen too much, lost too much, and finally found something worth protecting. "Because I'm tired," he said simply. "Tired of living like nothing matters, tired of waiting for a death that never comes." He paused, searching for words. "And because when I look at you, I see something I haven't seen in a long time." "What?" "A reason to fight for something other than survival." Kira was silent for a long moment. Then she reached out and touched his arm, a gesture so small and yet so significant. "Then we fight together." Jake nodded. "But not here. We need to leave. Tonight." "Where will we go?" "West, into the Dragoon Mountains. You said you have family there." "Chiricahua." Kira's expression flickered. "It is dangerous. My people do not trust outsiders, especially white men." "Then I'll have to earn their trust." Jake looked back at the cabin, at the only home he had known for 15 years. "It's not like I have anywhere else to go." They spent the afternoon preparing. Jake gathered what he could carry: ammunition, dried food, a bedroll, and a change of clothes. The old tin locket that had belonged to his mother, the only family heirloom he still possessed. Everything else he left behind. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold, Jake stood before his cabin with a burning torch in his hand. 15 years. He had lived in this valley for 15 years, building a life from nothing, creating a sanctuary where he could hide from his memories. Every board he had nailed, every stone he had placed, every night he had spent alone by the fire. All of it was about to become ash. Kira stood by the horses watching him. She did not speak, did not try to stop him or hurry him along. She understood that some moments required silence, that some sacrifices needed to be acknowledged before they could be made. Jake thought about Emily, about Sarah, about the graves in Virginia he would never visit, the goodbye he never got to say. He thought about the war, about the men he had killed and the friends he had lost, about all the years he had spent running from pain that followed him no matter how far he went. He thought about Kira, about the way she had looked at him when he refused to turn her over, about the feeling of her hand on his arm, the first human contact he had welcomed in longer than he could remember. Then he threw the torch. The dry wood caught immediately, flames licking up the walls like hungry tongues. Smoke billowed into the evening sky, black against the fading red of sunset. Jake did not look back as the walls collapsed. He mounted his horse and rode toward the mountains, Kira beside him, the heat of the burning cabin warming his back for a few precious moments. Behind him, his old life crumbled into embers. Ahead, the unknown waited, and somewhere in his chest, in a place he had thought long dead, something new began to burn. Not fire, not pain, hope. They rode through the night, pushing the horses hard until the moon set and darkness made travel too dangerous. Then they found a shallow cave in the foothills, barely large enough for 2 people and their mounts, and waited for dawn. Jake took first watch while Kira slept. He sat at the cave mouth with his rifle across his knees, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead and listening for sounds of pursuit. None came. Not yet. When the eastern sky began to lighten, they moved again. Kira took the lead now, guiding them through terrain that seemed impassable to Jake's eyes. She knew trails that existed on no map, paths carved by generations of her people through canyons and across ridges. She read the land like a book, finding water where there seemed to be none, avoiding ambush points with an instinct born of experience. Jake learned to follow without questioning. His skills were different, useful in their own way, but not suited to this kind of travel. Here in the wilderness of the Arizona Territory, Kira was the expert. She taught him as they rode, how to step so his boots left no clear prints, how to read the sky for signs of weather, how to find the small cacti that held water in their flesh, life-saving moisture in a landscape that seemed designed to kill. "You move too loudly," she told him on the second day. "Like a buffalo, the earth announces you're coming from far away. I've been walking this way for 49 years. Then you have 49 years of bad habits to unlearn." Jake smiled despite himself. It was the closest thing to humor he had heard from her. In return, he taught her English. She absorbed vocabulary at an astonishing rate, her mind seizing on words and phrases with the same fierce determination she brought to everything. Within days, she could hold basic conversations. Within a week, she was correcting his grammar. "You say ain't too much," she observed one evening. "It is not proper." "I'm not a proper man." "Clearly." They camped in hidden places. Narrow canyons, dense thickets, overhangs of rock that shielded them from sight. Kira insisted on cold camps when possible, no fires to send smoke signals to anyone who might be following. They ate dried meat and hard biscuits and drank from streams so cold they made Jake's teeth ache. At night they slept close together, not for romance, but for warmth. The desert that burned during the day turned bitter cold after dark, and 2 bodies generated more heat than one. The first time Kira pressed against his back for warmth, Jake lay rigid, unsure how to respond. It had been so long since anyone had touched him voluntarily, so long since he had allowed anyone close enough. But exhaustion overcame awkwardness, and eventually he slept. He did not dream of cannon fire that night. He dreamed of nothing at all. On the 3rd night, huddled in a cave while rain drummed against the rocks outside, Kira asked him the question he had been dreading. "Why do you live alone?" Jake stared into the darkness where a fire should have been. "I told you about Emily, about Sarah. That was over 30 years ago, a long time to grieve." "Is there a time limit on grief?" Kira was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "No, but there is a difference between grieving and hiding." Jake did not answer. The rain continued to fall, silver curtains glimpsed through the cave mouth. "After Swift Arrow died," Kira continued, "I wanted to die too. I had nothing left, no family, no home, no reason to see another sunrise. But I kept going. Do you know why? Why? Because dying is easy. Living is the hard choice, and I refuse to let the men who killed my family take that from me too." She shifted closer in the darkness, and Jake felt her hand find his. "You have been choosing the easy path for 15 years, hiding in your cabin, pretending the world does not exist, waiting for death to find you because you are too afraid to live." Her grip tightened. "But you made a different choice when you found me. You chose to fight, to risk, to live. I chose to commit treason and burn down my house. You chose hope." Her voice was fierce, insistent. "Do not pretend otherwise. I see the truth in you, Jake Thornton. You are not a man who runs from battle. You are a man who forgot what was worth fighting for." Jake turned her words over in his mind. They struck deeper than he wanted to admit. "And what am I fighting for now?" "I don't know." Kira's hand squeezed his once, then let go. "But perhaps we will discover that together." They sat in silence after that, listening to the rain, two wounded souls sharing darkness and finding it less lonely than before. On the fourth day they spotted the dust cloud. Kira saw it first, of course. Her eyes were sharper trained from childhood to read the signs of the land. She pointed toward the eastern horizon without speaking, and Jake pulled out his old brass spyglass to look. Riders, at least 6, maybe more, moving fast, following a trail that led directly toward their current position. "Cavalry," Jake said, collapsing the spyglass. "They found our track." "How far?" "Half a day behind, maybe less if they push their horses." Kira frowned, calculating distances and routes in her head. "We are 2 days from Chiricahua territory. They will catch us before we reach safety." "Then we need to lose them." They changed direction, heading into rougher country where horses would struggle. Jake dismounted and led his animal by hand, picking paths across bare rock that would leave no prints. Kira did the same, her movements fluid and confident where his were clumsy and uncertain. But the riders kept coming. Every time Jake checked through his spyglass, the dust cloud was closer. Their pursuers knew this land too, or had trackers who did. Every trick Jake and Kira tried only bought them hours, not days. On the 5th day, Jake climbed a rocky outcrop to survey their pursuit, and his blood turned to ice. The man leading the cavalry column was not Marcus Webb. Jake knew that face. Even from a distance, even through the distortion of the spyglass, he knew it like he knew his own reflection. Nathaniel Crawford. Jake lowered the spyglass slowly, his hand suddenly unsteady. "You know him." Kira had climbed up beside him, her eyes tracking his expression. "The leader. You recognize him?" "Yes." "Who is he?" Jake took a long breath, steadying himself against the flood of memories. "His name is Nathaniel Crawford. Nate. We served together in the war. He was your enemy. He was my friend." Jake stared at the distant figure, the man who had once meant more to him than almost anyone alive. "My best friend. He saved my life at Gettysburg." Kira was silent for a moment, absorbing this information. "And now he hunts us." "Yes." She did not ask the obvious question. Why would a friend become an enemy? The answer was clear enough. More than 30 years had passed since the war. Men changed. Loyalties shifted. The boy who had dragged Jake out of a field of corpses had become a cavalry officer bound by duty and orders that left no room for old sentiment. But knowing this did not make it easier. Jake thought about the young man Nate had been. 19 years old, the son of a wealthy Charleston family raised with slaves and servants and every privilege the Old South could offer. He had no business becoming friends with Jake, a poor farmer's son from the Virginia hills. But war stripped away such distinctions. In the mud and blood of the battlefield, all men were equal. They had survived Antietam together. Chancellorsville, the nightmare of Pickett's charge where half their regiment died in 20 minutes and the other half wished they had. When Jake took a bullet through his shoulder and collapsed in a field full of dead men, it was Nate who came back for him. Running through cannon fire, ignoring the orders to retreat, dragging Jake to safety, with bullets kicking up dirt all around them. "I owed him my life," Jake said quietly. "For 32 years I've carried that debt. And now I don't know what I carry." They descended from the outcrop in silence. The horses were rested, ready to run again, but running was becoming less viable by the hour. The cavalry was gaining, and the Chiricahua border was still too far away. "We cannot outrun them," Kira said, voicing what they both knew. "Not with tired horses and open ground between here and the mountains." "Then we don't run." She looked at him sharply. "What do you mean?" Jake studied the landscape around them. They were in a narrow valley flanked by steep ridges, the kind of terrain that could be either a death trap or a fortress depending on how you used it. "We find a defensible position, let them come to us, make them pay for every foot of ground. That is suicide." "Maybe." Jake met her eyes. "But it might also buy us time. Time for you to reach your people, time for help to arrive. I will not leave you. Kira." "No." Her voice was fierce, her dark eyes blazing. "We fight together, or we die together. Those are the only choices." Jake wanted to argue, wanted to insist that her survival was more important than his, that she had to reach the Chiricahua and tell them what happened at San Carlos, that the world needed her witness more than it needed a worn-out old soldier with nothing left to lose. But looking at her face, he knew argument was useless. "Together, then," he said. They found a position among the rocks at the valley's narrowest point. Jake set traps along the approach trip lines that would spook horses' loose stones that would give warning of anyone's advance. Kira climbed to a high point with her bow, selecting a spot that gave her clear sight lines while remaining hidden from below. Then they waited. The cavalry arrived at dusk. 8 riders entered the valley in a loose formation, their horses picking carefully over the rough ground. Nate Crawford rode at the front, his blue uniform dusty from days of hard travel, his face set in the grim expression of a man doing duty he did not enjoy. Jake stood in the middle of the trail alone, his rifle held across his body but not raised. "That's far enough, Nate." Crawford pulled his horse to a stop. Even in the fading light, Jake could see the shock of recognition cross his old friend's face. "Jake Thornton." Nate's voice carried across the distance between them, heavy with disbelief. "When they told me about a white man harboring an Apache fugitive, I didn't think it would be me? No, I didn't." They faced each other across 30 feet of rocky ground, 2 men who had once been brothers in everything but blood. The years had changed them both. Nate's dark hair had gone gray, his face lined with the weight of command. But his eyes were the same, Jake realized, the same eyes that had met his across 1,000 campfires, 100 battlefields. "You need to stand aside," Nate said. "I have orders to bring the woman back for trial. I don't want to hurt you, Jake, but I will if you force my hand." "Trial?" Jake laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "Is that what Webb is calling it, a trial?" Something flickered in Nate's expression. "Lieutenant Webb has filed formal charges against the fugitive, murder, theft, assault on federal officers. The evidence is substantial." "The evidence is lies." Jake took a step forward, his voice rising. "I know what Webb did, Nate. The woman told me everything. The raid on San Carlos, the murder of her husband, the child they shot in the back, the things they did to her before she escaped. Those are serious accusations. They're the truth." Nate was quiet for a long moment. Behind him, his men sat their horses in tense silence, hands near their weapons, watching the confrontation unfold. "Even if that's true," Nate said slowly, "it doesn't change my orders. I'm required to bring her in. What happens after that is for the courts to decide." What happens after that is Webb kills her before she can testify. You know that. You know how these things work. I know my duty. Your duty." Jake's voice dripped with contempt. "I remember when your duty was staying alive long enough to see tomorrow, when your duty was watching your brothers' backs, not hunting down innocent women for men who rape and murder children. That's enough." Is it enough, Nate? Because I remember you. I remember the man who ran into cannon fire to drag me out of a pile of corpses. I remember the man who held my hand when I was bleeding out, who told me I wasn't allowed to die because we had too much living left to do. Jake's voice cracked slightly. What happened to that man? Nate's jaw tightened. For just a moment, Jake saw pain flash across his old friend's face. That man learned that the world doesn't run on sentiment, that sometimes you have to follow orders even when they taste like poison, that the only way to survive is to pick a side and stick with it, even when your side is wrong. Especially then. Nate's voice hardened again. This is your last chance, Jake. Step aside. Let me do my job. I'll make sure she gets a fair hearing. No. The word hung in the air between them, final and absolute. Nate sighed heavily. Then I'm sorry, old friend. Truly sorry. He raised his hand to signal his men, and that was when the arrows started flying. Kira's first shot took the soldier on Nate's right through the shoulder, spinning him from his saddle. Her second arrow grazed a horse's flank, sending the animal into a panicked rear that threw its rider to the ground. Jake dove behind a boulder as the cavalry opened fire, bullets whining off stone and kicking up dirt all around him. He came up shooting his Winchester, cracking 3 times in rapid succession, not to kill, but to suppress, to keep heads down, while Kira found new targets from her hidden position. The narrow valley became a chaos of gunfire and screaming horses. The soldiers tried to advance, but the rough terrain and precise arrow fire made progress impossible. Every time one of them tried to flank Jake's position, an arrow appeared from a different angle, forcing them back into cover. But they were still outnumbered, still outgunned, and ammunition was not infinite. Jake heard the click of an empty chamber and ducked down to reload, his fingers flying through the familiar motions. Above him, Kira's bow sang again and again, her aim unerring despite the growing darkness. "Thornton," Nate's voice cut through the chaos. "This is pointless. You can't win." Jake popped up and fired twice more, driving a soldier back behind a rock. "Maybe not," he shouted back, "but I can make you pay for every inch." The firefight continued as the last light faded from the sky. Jake lost track of time, lost track of everything except the rhythm of shoot, duck, reload, shoot again. His shoulder ached from the rifle's kick. His ears rang from the constant gunfire. Then Kira's voice reached him from above, tight with alarm. "Jake, behind us." He spun and saw them. More soldiers coming from the western approach. A second group that must have circled around while the first kept them pinned down. They were surrounded. Jake's rifle clicked on an empty chamber. He reached for more ammunition and found only 2 cartridges left. 2 bullets. At least a dozen soldiers closing in from both directions. Kira slid down from her position, her quiver nearly empty, 3 arrows remaining. She pressed her back against the rock beside him, her breath coming fast but steady. "I am sorry," she said quietly. "For what? For bringing this upon you, for destroying your life." Jake looked at her. In the dim light of early stars, her face was beautiful and fierce and utterly without fear. She had accepted death. She was ready for it. He realized that he was not. "You didn't destroy anything," he said. "You gave me something I hadn't had in 15 years. What? A reason to care whether I lived or died." Kira's eyes glistened in the darkness. She reached out and touched his face, her fingers cool against his weathered skin. "Then let us die well," she said. "Thornton." Nate's voice again, closer now. "It's over. Throw down your weapons and come out. I give you my word, you'll be treated fairly." Jake laughed bitterly. "Your word? What's that worth these days, Nate?" "More than you know." There was something different in Nate's voice now, something that made Jake pause. "I need to talk to you. Just talk. Give me 5 minutes." Jake and Kira exchanged glances. It could be a trap, probably was a trap, but they were out of options. 5 minutes, Jake called back. Just you, no weapons. Try anything and my friend up there puts an arrow through your eye. A moment of silence. Then Nate emerged from cover, hands raised, moving slowly toward Jake's position. And Jake had no idea which way it would go. The years had changed him, carved new lines into his face, and threaded silver through his dark hair. But his eyes were the same eyes that had met Jake's across 100 campfires during the war. He stopped 10 feet away, close enough to talk without shouting, far enough that Jake could react if this turned out to be a trick. "You look like hell," Nate said. "You look like a man who sold his soul for a blue coat." Nate flinched slightly at that. Maybe I did. Maybe we all did, one way or another. "What do you want, Nate? Your 5 minutes are ticking." Nate glanced around at the rocky terrain, at the positions where his soldiers waited, at the darkness where Kira crouched with her bow. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, "about what you said, about Webb, about San Carlos. And I did some checking." Nate's voice dropped lower, meant only for Jake's ears. "Before we left Fort Apache, I looked at the records, the reports from that night. The official story says Swift Arrow attacked first, that the soldiers acted in self-defense. That's a lie." "I know." Nate met Jake's eyes, and there was something new in his expression. Doubt. Shame. The beginning of understanding. "There were witnesses, other Apache at San Carlos, who saw what happened. They were afraid to speak, but the records show inconsistencies, times that don't match up, details that contradict each other. Someone covered up what really happened that night." Jake felt his heart begin to pound. "You believe her?" "I believe something is very wrong." Nate took a deep breath. "Webb has been pushing hard for this pursuit. Too hard. He volunteered to lead it personally, pulled strings to get assigned. A lieutenant doesn't do that for a routine fugitive hunt, not unless he has something personal at stake. His career, his freedom, his life." Jake lowered his rifle slightly, hope warring with caution. "She's the only witness, Nate, the only person who can prove what he did, which is why he wants her dead before she can testify." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of revelation hanging between them. "So what now?" Jake asked. "You going to arrest me, drag her back to face Webb's justice?" Nate was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was heavy with something that might have been grief. "Do you remember what you said to me at Gettysburg, when I was ready to give up, ready to let the Yankees finish what they started?" Jake remembered. He remembered it like it was yesterday. "I said giving up was easy, that any coward could lie down and die, that the hard choice was getting back up and fighting even when everything seemed hopeless. You said that surviving wasn't enough, that we had to survive for something." Nate's jaw tightened. "I forgot that. Somewhere along the way, I forgot what I was surviving for. I just kept following orders, doing what I was told, pretending that the uniform made everything right. And now—" Nate reached up slowly and unpinned the cavalry insignia from his chest. He held it in his palm for a moment, looking at it like a man saying goodbye to something precious. Then he dropped it in the dirt. "Now I remember." Jake stared at his old friend, hardly daring to believe what he was seeing. "Nate." "Webb is camped at Red Rock Canyon with the rest of his men. 20 soldiers, maybe more. He's planning to attack at dawn, sweep through Chiricahua territory, and burn out anyone who might have given you shelter." Nate's voice was steady now, filled with purpose. "I can delay him, lead my men in the wrong direction, buy you time to reach the border. They'll court-martial you, strip you of rank, maybe hang you for treason." "Probably." Nate smiled grimly. "But I've spent over 30 years carrying the debt I owe you for Gettysburg. Consider this my payment." "I never asked for payment." "No, you never did." Nate extended his hand. "That's why you deserve it." Jake clasped his friend's hand, feeling the strength in the grip, the commitment behind the gesture. "What will you do after—" "I don't know. Maybe write down what really happened. Make sure the truth survives, even if I don't." Nate shrugged. The world should know what men like Webb are capable of when they wear uniforms and hide behind authority. That's a dangerous road. All the best ones are. They released hands and Nate stepped back. He turned to his soldiers who had watched the exchange with varying degrees of confusion and suspicion. "Mount up," he ordered. "We're moving out. The trail leads east." "But sir," one of the soldiers protested, "the tracks clearly go west." "I said east." Nate's voice brooked no argument. "We must have misread the signs. It happens in terrain like this." The soldiers exchanged uncertain glances but obeyed. They mounted their horses and began to ride back the way they had come, leaving Jake and Kira alone in the darkness. Nate paused at the edge of the firelight, turning back one last time. "Jake?" "Yeah. Don't waste this chance. Whatever you've found with her, whatever you're fighting for, make it count." "I will. And if we ever meet again." Nate smiled, and for a moment he looked like the young man Jake had known in the war, full of hope and reckless courage. "Pretend you don't know me." Then he rode into the darkness, and Jake never saw him again. They reached the border of Chiricahua territory 2 days later. Jake knew they had crossed into Apache land because the feeling of the air changed. Not physically, not in any way he could describe, but something shifted. The wilderness felt older here, more alive, more aware. Kira sensed it too. She rode straighter in the saddle, her eyes scanning the ridges and canyons with new intensity. "We are close," she said. "My people will have seen us by now." "Should we be worried?" "That depends on how they feel about uninvited guests." As if on cue, figures appeared on the rocks above them. Jake counted a dozen at first, then more emerging from places he would have sworn were empty moments before. Apache warriors, their faces painted in patterns of red and black bows, drawn and arrows nocked. They were surrounded. Kira raised her hand slowly, palms out, and called out in her native tongue. Jake did not understand the words, but he recognized the tone. Formal, respectful, identifying herself. A long moment passed. The warriors did not lower their weapons. Then an older man stepped forward from the group, his face marked with old scars, his eyes sharp as an eagle's. He studied Kira for a long moment, then spoke a single word. "Kira." She answered in Apache, and something in her voice cracked, not with fear, with relief, with the overwhelming emotion of finally reaching safety after 6 months of running. The old warrior descended from the rocks, moving with the fluid grace of a man half his age, despite the white in his hair. He approached Kira and took her face in his hands, studying her features as if searching for something lost and found again. "Little Star," he said, and this time Jake understood. "A name, an endearment. We thought you were dead." "Not dead, Uncle." Kira's voice shook. "Just lost for a while." They embraced, and Jake saw tears on the old warrior's weathered cheeks. Around them, the other Apache lowered their weapons, watching the reunion with expressions that ranged from curiosity to joy. Then the old man's gaze fell on Jake, and his expression hardened. "Who is this?" Kira pulled back, wiping her eyes. "His name is Jake Thornton. He saved my life. He is white." "Yes. White men killed your father. White men killed Swift Arrow and Little Fox. White men have hunted us like animals across our own lands." The old warrior's voice was cold. "Why should we trust this one?" "Because he gave up everything to help me." Kira stepped between Jake and her uncle, her posture protective. "He burned his home. He fought his own people. He walked away from his entire life because he believed protecting me was more important than his own safety." Words. White men are full of words. Then let him prove himself with actions. Kira's chin lifted, her voice taking on a tone of authority. "I claim him uncle. I claim responsibility for his conduct among our people. If he betrays us, the shame is mine." A murmur ran through the watching warriors. Jake did not understand the significance of what Kira had said, but he could see from their reactions that it was serious. The old warrior Broken Arrow studied Jake with those sharp eyes, taking his measure, judging his worth. "You understand what she has done?" he asked in accented but clear English. "Not entirely," Jake admitted. She has vouched for you with her own honor. If you prove false, she will share your punishment." Broken Arrow's voice held no warmth. "Among our people, that is not a small thing." Jake looked at Kira. She met his eyes steadily, without regret. "I know what I'm doing," she said. "Kira, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." She touched his arm, the gesture somehow more intimate than any kiss. "I trust you, Jake Thornton. I trust you with my life and my honor. Now let me prove it." Jake turned back to Broken Arrow. "I don't know your customs," he said. "I don't speak your language or understand your ways, but I know this. Your niece has more courage than any person I've ever met, more strength than most men could dream of. She survived things that would have broken anyone else, and she did it with her spirit intact." He straightened his shoulders. "If she believes I'm worthy of trust, then I'll spend the rest of my life proving her right." Broken Arrow was silent for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. "Come," he said. "We will take you to our village. The elders will decide what is to be done." The Chiricahua settlement lay hidden in a valley so remote that Jake doubted any white man had ever seen it. Steep cliffs surrounded it on three sides, with only one narrow entrance that could be defended by a handful of warriors against an army. Spring water bubbled up from underground sources, feeding a small stream that wound through the center of the village. Gardens grew in terraced plots along the valley walls, and horses grazed in meadows of grass, so green it seemed to glow in the morning light. It was beautiful, and it was a fortress. Dozens of wickiups dotted the valley floor, the dome-shaped shelters made of bent poles and animal hides providing homes for several hundred people. Women worked at various tasks, grinding corn and tanning leather and weaving baskets. Children ran through the paths between dwellings, their laughter echoing off the canyon walls. Old men sat in groups talking and smoking and watching the world with eyes that had seen entire generations come and go. This was not the primitive camp of savages that white newspapers described. This was a community, a civilization, a people who had lived and thrived in this harsh land for longer than the United States had existed. Jake felt the weight of every step as Broken Arrow led them through the village. Eyes followed him constantly, faces ranging from curious to hostile. He was an outsider here, an intruder, the representative of a people who had brought nothing but death and displacement to the Apache. And yet Kira walked beside him, her head high, her presence a silent statement of support. They stopped before the largest wickiup, where a group of elderly men sat in a semicircle. The Council of Elders, Jake realized. The leaders of this community. Broken Arrow spoke rapidly in Apache, gesturing toward Kira and Jake in turn. The elders listened without expression, occasionally asking questions that Jake could not understand. Finally, one of them, a man so old, his face was a map of wrinkles and his hair was white as snow, raised a hand for silence. He spoke directly to Jake, his voice surprisingly strong for his apparent age. "You have brought danger to our people, white man. The soldiers who hunt Kira will not stop at the borders we have drawn. They will come with their guns and their fire as they always do." "I know," Jake said, "and I'm sorry for that. Sorry does not stop bullets. Sorry does not bring back the dead." The old man's eyes bored into Jake like augers. "What will you do to protect the people you have endangered?" Jake thought about the question. It deserved a real answer, not platitudes or empty promises. "I'll fight," he said. "When they come, and they will come, I'll stand with your warriors and fight. I know their tactics. I know their weapons. I know how cavalry thinks and moves. That knowledge could be valuable." Knowledge. The elder seemed unimpressed. "Many white men have knowledge. Few have honor." "I can't speak for other white men. I can only speak for myself." Jake met the old man's gaze without flinching. "I've spent 15 years running from my own past, hiding from the world, pretending that if I stayed quiet and kept my head down, nothing would ever touch me again. Kira showed me how wrong I was. She showed me that some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight seems hopeless." "And what is worth fighting for?" Jake glanced at Kira standing proud and fierce beside him. Her people, the truth about what was done to her family. He looked back at the elder. "And maybe in some small way, my own redemption." The council conferred in low voices. Jake waited, acutely aware that his life hung in the balance of their decision. Finally, the old man spoke again. "You will stay, for now, but you will be watched. Every step you take, every word you speak, will be judged." He leaned forward slightly. "And if you fail us, if you prove false, no corner of this earth will hide you from our vengeance." Jake nodded. "I understand." "Good." The elder sat back. "Broken Arrow will assign you a place to sleep. Tomorrow we will discuss the soldiers who are coming and what must be done." The audience was over. Webb came 3 days later. He brought 40 soldiers, not 20, pulling reinforcements from 2 other forts. He came with rifles and pistols and enough ammunition to fight a small war. He came with the fury of a man whose secrets were about to be exposed and the desperation of someone with nothing left to lose. He also walked directly into a trap. The Chiricahua had been preparing since the moment Jake and Kira arrived. Scouts tracked Webb's approach for days, reporting his numbers, his route, his pace. Warriors positioned themselves at strategic points throughout the canyons, hidden in places where cavalry could not follow. Supplies were cached in locations only the Apache knew. When Webb's column entered the narrow pass that led to the village, they found the way blocked by a landslide that seemed natural but was anything but. "It's an ambush," one of his officers warned. "Sir, we should fall back and find another route." But Webb was beyond reason. He had come too far, risked too much to turn back now. "We push through," he ordered. "Whatever savages are hiding in these rocks, we'll flush them out and destroy them." He never had the chance. The first wave of arrows came from above, raining down on the packed column with deadly accuracy. Horses screamed and fell. Men shouted in confusion and fear. The tight confines of the canyon made it impossible to form a defensive line. Jake watched from a ridge overlooking the pass, a captured cavalry carbine in his hands. He had fought in enough battles to recognize the moment when an engagement turned from fight to rout. This was that moment. Webb's soldiers tried to retreat, but found their escape blocked by more Chiricahua warriors who had circled behind them. They tried to climb the canyon walls, but the terrain was too steep and the Apache were too accurate. They tried to form a square and make a stand, but the arrows kept coming, thinning their ranks with each passing minute. In less than an hour, it was over. When the smoke cleared and the last echoes of gunfire faded into silence, Webb stood alone in the center of the canyon, surrounded by dead horses and wounded men. His uniform was torn, his face streaked with dust and blood, but he was uninjured. Jake descended from the ridge rifle held ready but not raised. "It's finished, Webb." The lieutenant turned toward the voice, and Jake saw the madness in his eyes, the cornered animal desperation of a man who had run out of options. "Thornton." Webb laughed, a harsh and broken sound. "The rancher who threw away everything for a squaw. How does it feel to be a race traitor?" "Better than being a murderer and a rapist." Webb's hand moved toward his pistol. "Don't." Jake's voice was cold. "There are 50 arrows pointed at your heart right now. You reach for that gun, you'll be dead before it clears the holster." Webb hesitated. His hand trembled over the weapon fingers, twitching with the urge to fight. "You think you've won," he spat. "You think this changes anything? The army will send more soldiers. They'll burn this valley to the ground. They'll hunt down every Apache who had a part in this and hang them from the nearest tree." "Maybe." Jake stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "But you won't be there to see it. You'll be standing trial for what you did at San Carlos, for the murders, for the rape, for the child you shot in the back." Her word against mine. The word of an Apache savage against a United States Army officer. Not just her word. Jake smiled grimly. "Captain Crawford found records, witnesses, proof of what you did and who covered it up. It's already on its way to Washington. Whatever happens to us, the truth is going to come out." For the first time, real fear flickered across Webb's face. "Crawford, that traitor, he'll be court-martialed, executed. No one will believe him." "Maybe, maybe not, but everyone will remember your name, Webb. Everyone will know what you are." Jake raised his rifle, pointing it directly at Webb's heart. "The only question left is whether you face that judgment alive or dead." Webb's hand closed around his pistol. He never got the chance to draw. An arrow appeared in his shoulder, spinning him sideways. He screamed and fell to his knees, clutching the shaft as blood welled between his fingers. Kira walked out of the rocks, her bow still raised, her face as cold and hard as granite. "You killed my husband," she said, her voice carrying across the sudden silence. "You killed my son. You destroyed everything I loved." Webb looked up at her, pain and hatred twisting his features. "Then finish it," he gasped. "Kill me. Be the savage everyone says you are." Kira drew another arrow, knocked it, raised the bow. For a long moment she held the draw, the arrowhead pointed at Webb's throat. Jake could see the tension in her arms, the fury in her eyes, the hunger for vengeance that had kept her alive through 6 months of running. Then slowly she lowered the bow. "No," she said. "Death is too easy for you. You will live. You will stand trial. You will sit in a prison cell while the whole world learns what you are." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "And every night for the rest of your miserable life, you will remember the woman who could have killed you and chose to let you suffer instead." She turned her back on him and walked away. Jake gestured to 2 Chiricahua warriors who came forward and roughly bound Webb's arms. "Take him," Jake said. "Keep him alive. He has a long trip ahead of him." The army did send more soldiers, but by the time they arrived, the Chiricahua village had vanished, its people scattered to 6 other locations deep in the mountains. The soldiers searched for weeks and found nothing but empty canyons and abandoned camps. Webb stood trial in Washington as Jake had promised. The evidence Crawford had gathered, combined with testimony from other Apache survivors who finally found the courage to speak, was damning. Webb was convicted of murder and conduct unbecoming an officer. He spent the rest of his life in a military prison, forgotten and disgraced. Crawford himself was court-martialed for disobeying orders, but public sympathy for his actions, fueled by newspaper coverage of the Webb trial, led to a lenient sentence. He was dishonorably discharged but avoided prison. He spent his remaining years writing about his experiences, documenting the truth about what happened on the frontier and the crimes committed in the name of American expansion. His books were not popular in his lifetime, but years later historians would cite them as crucial primary sources for understanding the Apache Wars. Jake never saw his old friend again, but sometimes late at night he would look up at the stars and wonder where Nate was, what he was doing, whether he had found peace. He hoped so. He hoped that at least one of them had escaped the shadows of the past. The seasons turned, and Jake Thornton became Shadow Walker. It was not a quick transformation. The Chiricahua did not grant trust easily, and Jake had to earn every inch of acceptance through months of patient effort. He learned their language, stumbling over unfamiliar sounds until they began to feel natural on his tongue. He learned their customs, the elaborate codes of honor and hospitality that governed every interaction. He learned to hunt without waste, to track without being tracked, to move through the wilderness like a ghost. The old suspicion never fully disappeared. Some of the elders still watched him with wary eyes, still whispered when they thought he could not hear. He was white, and that would never change. The blood of their enemies ran in his veins. But action spoke louder than ancestry. When Jake fought beside their warriors against a cavalry patrol that strayed too close to their territory, he earned respect. When he used his knowledge of army tactics to help plan a successful ambush, he earned gratitude. When he sat with the children and told them stories of the white man's world, helping them understand the enemy they faced, he earned something approaching affection. And always, always, Kira was beside him. Their relationship had deepened in ways Jake had not expected, had not dared to hope for. It did not happen all at once. There were no dramatic declarations, no passionate confessions. Instead, there were small moments, a hand brush that lingered too long, a shared laugh over some private joke, the comfortable silence of 2 people who no longer needed words to understand each other. One night, sitting before the fire in the wickiup they now shared, Kira asked him a question. "Do you regret it, leaving your world behind?" Jake thought about his cabin now, nothing but charred ruins and ash. He thought about the cattle drives and the lonely nights and the years he had spent trying to outrun his own memories. "No," he said. "I regret the years I wasted before, the years I spent hiding instead of living." He reached out and took her hand. "But I don't regret anything that led me here. Here is dangerous. Here is uncertain. The soldiers will keep hunting us. The reservation will keep calling. I know. We may have to run again. We may have to fight again. We may have to sacrifice everything we have built. I know that too." Kira looked at him with those dark eyes, the same eyes that had first met his across a cabin full of fear and violence, now softened by something gentler. "Then why stay? Why not go back to the white world where you would be safe?" Jake smiled. It felt strange on his face, that expression. He had almost forgotten how. "Because this is the first time in 15 years I've felt like I was actually alive. The first time I've had something worth protecting, something worth dying for." He squeezed her hand. "And someone worth living for." Kira was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. "I never thought I would feel this way again. After Swift Arrow, after Little Fox. I thought that part of me was dead forever. And now. She leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture of trust more intimate than any embrace. "Now I want to see what tomorrow brings." They sat together as the fire burned low, two people from different worlds who had found each other against all odds. Outside, the wind whispered through the canyon, carrying sounds that might have been distant thunder or simply the heartbeat of the land itself. It was not a happily ever after. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The world was still dangerous, still uncertain, still full of enemies and obstacles. But for the first time in 15 years, Jake Thornton was not afraid of the future. He was looking forward to it. The child came in spring. Kira's labor lasted through the night and into the gray hours of morning. But when the first rays of dawn touched the canyon walls, a thin cry echoed through the village. A girl. Jake held his daughter for the first time as the sun rose, cradling her tiny body in arms that had held rifles and ropes and the weight of dead men. She was impossibly small, impossibly fragile, her skin a shade somewhere between his weathered tan and Kira's copper brown. Her eyes, when they opened, were gray-blue, like Jake's. But the set of her jaw, the shape of her nose, the stubborn determination already visible in her newborn face, those were all Kira. "She's beautiful," Jake whispered. Kira, exhausted but radiant, smiled from the bed of furs where she lay. "She is a miracle." They named her Dawn in English, and Shikis in Apache. Two names for two heritages, a bridge between two worlds that had been at war for as long as anyone could remember. Looking down at his daughter's face, Jake understood for the first time why people believed in the future. Why they planted trees they would never see grow tall. Why they built houses and raised children and made plans that extended beyond their own brief spans. It was not about legacy or immortality or any of the grand concepts that philosophers debated. It was about this tiny heartbeat against his chest, this small hand curling around his finger, this life that he and Kira had created together, this proof that love could emerge from violence and hope could rise from despair. "I don't know what kind of world she'll grow up in," Jake said quietly. "Whether there will be peace or more war, whether her people and mine will ever stop fighting." "No one knows the future," Kira replied. "That is the nature of tomorrow." "Are you scared?" "Terrified." Kira reached out and touched Dawn's cheek. "But also grateful, because whatever comes, she will know she was loved. She will know that her parents found each other across impossible distances and chose each other despite impossible odds. And she will know that love is stronger than hate, stronger than fear, stronger than all the walls men build between themselves." Jake looked at his wife, at the woman who had stumbled into his cabin 6 months ago with a knife and a wound and a story that changed everything. "I love you," he said. The words came out rusty, unpracticed. He had not said them to anyone in 15 years. Kira's eyes glistened. "I know. I have known for a long time." She smiled that rare and precious expression that still made his heart skip. "I love you too, Jake Thornton. Even though you snore like a buffalo and your Apache pronunciation is terrible." He laughed. The sound surprised him, bubbling up from somewhere deep in his chest that he had thought was dead and gone. Dawn stirred at the noise, making a small sound of protest before settling back against his chest. "What do we do now?" Jake asked. "Now." Kira closed her eyes, exhaustion finally claiming her. "Now we live, one day at a time, one moment at a time, until there are no more days left." That sounds like a plan. It is the only plan that has ever mattered. Jake sat before his wickiup as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. A year had passed since Dawn's birth. She was walking now, toddling around the village with the fearless curiosity of all children, charming elders and warriors alike with her gap-toothed smile. She called Jake Papa in English and Kira Mother in Apache, mixing her languages with the casual ease of the truly bilingual. The world outside their valley continued to turn. More soldiers came and went. The reservation continued its slow work of erasing Apache culture. Friends died and children were born, and the great wheel of history ground onward. But here in this hidden corner of the Arizona Territory, life went on. Jake watched his daughter chase a butterfly across the meadow, her laughter rising into the evening air like music. Kira emerged from the wickiup behind him, settling onto the ground at his side. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "The past, the future, everything in between." "That is a lot of thinking." "I had a lot of time to practice, all those years alone." Kira leaned against him, warm and solid and real. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had turned me away that first night, if you had reported me to the soldiers like a good citizen?" "Sometimes." Jake put his arm around her. "I would have gone back to my empty life, kept running from my memories, probably drunk myself to death within a few years. Instead, you committed treason, burned down your house, fought the United States Army, and became an Apache warrior. When you put it that way, it sounds crazy." "It was crazy," Kira smiled. "That is why I love you." They sat together as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded Jake of that first evening, the evening when he had ridden home and found a stranger in his bed. "I've been thinking about something," he said after a while. "Yes. About what I want Dawn to know, when she's older, about who she is and where she came from." Kira turned to look at him, her expression curious. "I want her to know that she was born between two worlds, that she carries the blood of both peoples, the history of both peoples, the pain and hope of both peoples." Jake paused, gathering his thoughts. "But more than that, I want her to know that she doesn't have to choose, that being in between doesn't mean being torn apart. It means being a bridge." A bridge, something that connects what was separated, something that makes communication possible where there was only silence. He gestured at the village around them, at the life they had built together. "That's what we did, isn't it? We found a way to connect across all the differences that should have kept us apart, and maybe someday more people will be able to do the same." Kira was quiet for a long moment. "You have become quite the philosopher," she finally said. "I had a good teacher. I taught you to hunt and track and fight. Philosophy was not part of the curriculum." "No." Jake turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "You taught me something more important. You taught me that it's never too late to start over, that the past doesn't have to define the future, that one honest choice can change the entire direction of a life. You are giving me too much credit. I was just trying to survive." "And you did survive, against everything, against odds that would have crushed anyone else." Jake squeezed her hands. "You survived, and in surviving you showed me how to live again." Dawn came running back to them, clutching a wildflower in her small fist. "Papa, Mama, look what I found." Jake lifted his daughter onto his lap, accepting the flower with the gravity such a gift deserved. "It's beautiful, little one. I found it by the stream. Can we keep it?" "Flowers need to stay in the ground to keep living," Kira explained gently, "but we can enjoy it until it fades." Dawn considered this with the solemnity of a 2-year-old confronting a profound truth. "Okay," she finally decided. "We enjoy it now." Jake looked at Kira over their daughter's head. "Out of the mouths of babes," he said. Kira smiled. "Indeed." The sun continued its descent. Shadows lengthened across the valley. Somewhere in the village, someone began to play a flute, the haunting melody drifting through the evening air. Jake Thornton held his daughter close and watched the day fade into memory. He thought about the man he had been, the man he had become, and all the choices that had led him here. He thought about Emily and Sarah, the family he had lost so long ago. He thought about Nate Crawford riding away into darkness, paying a debt that had never really been owed. And he thought about this moment, this improbable, impossible, wonderful moment, surrounded by people who had become his family in a place that had become his home. Some men spend their whole lives searching for purpose. Some men never find it at all. Jake Thornton had found his in the most unexpected place imaginable, in the eyes of a wounded Apache woman who had stumbled into his cabin one blood-red evening, in the smile of a daughter who carried 2 worlds in her small hands, in the understanding that the day he came home and found a stranger in his bed was not an ending at all. It was a beginning. The story continues as all stories do, through seasons of joy and seasons of sorrow, through challenges met and challenges still to come, through all the ordinary days that make up an extraordinary life. But that is a tale for another time. For now, let it be enough to say that Jake Thornton, the man who had been lost, finally found his way home. And home, he discovered, was not a cabin or a valley or a place on any map. Home was wherever love waited. Home was wherever hope survived. Home was the space between 2 worlds where a bridge could be built by those brave enough to try.